Ever wonder what happens to old used tires? Believe it or not, we now use them to manufacture rubber mats that can cover an entire arena. Now that's great recycling. Used tires are a real source of pollution. This pile represents about 100,000 of them. At any rate, these tires will have a second life. They'll be recycled to make rubber mats. Each day in this factory, they recycle 15,000 tires into mats. Tires have to be reduced to little granules, but first, this conveyor feeds the tires into the washer. Tires are washed with a water-based biodegradable preparation. Then they're sent to the shredder. The shredder has 2 rows of large teeth. These grind up the tires into pieces. This shredder is able to cut up almost 1,000 tires an hour. They come out as fairly good-sized pieces of tires, which are then shredded a second time. Metal is magnetically separated from the rubber, and the metal pieces are recycled at another factory. Other components of the tires, such as fiberglass and nylon, also have to be separated. They use a sifter to get out unwanted rubbish. Recuperated rubber particles purged of foreign materials measure about 2.5 millimeters. Some 16 tons of tire particles are piled up in this recycling depot. But the particles are still too large to be used. They're sent to a secondary shredder's supply tank, where they'll be reduced even further. This tractor feeds the secondary shredder. Grinding action produces a kind of rubber powder. The powder is spread out on these enormous molds. This mold has a length of 7 meters and a width of 1.2 meters. Thickness varies according to the product being made. The molds filled with rubber powder are stored in this loading magazine of the press. Once full, the molds are sent to the rubber mat press. Here's the mat press. The powder has to be cooked at a very high temperature for about 30 minutes. Cooking time depends on the product being made. The cooked mat goes through the unmolding unit before being sent off to cool. The rubber mats are still extremely hot. They're cooled with jets of water for a period of several minutes. The cooled mats can now be sent to the next department. This conveyor in the cutting center positions the mat before it's cut. The mat is vibrated to eliminate any surplus water. Each rubber mat is now cut up into 3 pieces. The cut mats are then stacked into a pile and stored before being shipped. The company also makes mud guards. These are fabricated the same way as the preceding mats. After having been cooled in water, but while they're still warm, they remove the surplus rubber. This operation is called notching. Hard rubber rings are also produced at this facility with the same fabrication methods and, as always, from old, used tires. Over a 12-hour period, this facility makes no less than 12,000 rubber mats from old recycled tires. This translates into good news for our environment. This household item is something you might take for granted. But can you imagine life without it? The toilet, a shiny, sculpted marvel of manufacturing. The first public restrooms appeared in ancient Rome when the Emperor Vespasian built latrines. Such public urinals became widely known as Vespasiennes by 1840. In 1775, the invention of a water flush system created toilets somewhat resembling today's convenience. The valve and siphon were added in 1784 and the septic tank in 1896. A toilet is an everyday object whose fabrication requires several days of work. It involves assembling several molds, called tools. Each new product requires the design of a master plaster mold, from which they will produce a plastic tool. This latter will be used to create plaster duplicates used as production molds. The plaster production mold of a toilet is made from 6 different tools, which have to be assembled. Their lifespan is only 2 months. The process begins with a mixture of water and plaster according to a precise recipe. Then the liquid is poured into this filling hole of the tool. Once the plaster hardens, they can proceed with unmolding. They strike the end at the junction of the plaster mold and the tool with a rubber hammer so as not to damage the plaster. The pieces are gently assembled. The toilet softly takes its shape. It's in this same mold that they will later color the clay. Then they install tensioning straps. Little blocks are inserted between the mold and the strap to increase the tension. The mold will soon be filled with liquid, and they thus prevent any distortion. Here a new recipe is being prepared. This time it's a slurry, a composite of clay and silica. This preparation is spread out over 48 hours. Now they install the core, the upper part of the mold. They can now proceed with the filling. This copper distribution pipe, connected to the tank containing the slurry, permits the filling of several molds at a time. They need about 20 kilos of the mix per bowl mold. After an hour, the slurry has attained a thickness of 1 centimeter. The plug is pulled to allow the excess slurry to run out. They can now unmold the still fragile piece. This thicker slurry is used to adhere the 2 pieces together. They cut the holes and unmold the ensemble. The toilet is now molded. Then, to obtain a perfect appearance, they remove the little fillet formed by the surplus adhesive slurry. The toilets air dry for 36 hours, then in a warm air dryer for 12 hours. Finishing must be impeccable. They carefully sand the surface to make it perfectly smooth. A vacuum draws up the dust. Then with a jet of compressed air, dust and debris are blown away. Bowls are hand-painted in a special room. As for the water tanks, they're painted by an automated robot. This truck carries the different parts to the final fabrication stage, baking. The toilets remain in this oven at the very high temperature of 1,176 degrees centigrade for 23 hours. It takes this long to fuse the clay and silica. The paint then becomes hard and shiny, and it's all done. The The toilets in the different bowls now take on shapes more elegant than in the past, but the fabrication of each one of them will have the same basic construction steps, involving 20 kilos of slurry and almost 4 days of labor.